Good morning, Mike. Thanks for joining us this morning. You're going to talk to us today about a dispute and possible resolution solution for AVZ Minerals. So good morning. Thanks for joining us. Can we just kick off? Give us a little bit of background on yourself. What's your track record?
Sure. Good morning, Matthew. My name is Mike Carrick. I'm a chartered accountant by professional background, having developed 7 mines in 5 different countries. Most of those mines have been in developing countries, including Africa, where I led the teams to develop the first major mine in Tanzania and another major mine called Erbitan in Ghana. I've also, in addition to that mining experience, have extensive experience in international arbitration in the seats of both London and Singapore, where we prevailed in respect of all major arguments.
Right, which might be handy in the situation we're about to talk about, where AVZ Minerals have found themselves in a position where they seem to be in dispute with a lot of other key stakeholders. You've been put forward by Fatel, or you and 2 other directors have been put forward by Fatel, one of shareholder, to go onto the board to help the company resolve this. They seem to be somewhat resistant. So maybe outline the backdrop to this story and we can get into the detail.
Yeah, absolutely. The first point I'd make in respect of the nominations of those 3 directors from Fatel is that this is not a hostile situation. We approached the company for a discussion to try and resolve this in a amicable and friendly fashion. And secondly, we're not seeking the removal of any shareholders. We've simply nominated as 3 independent directors to be considered by the AVZ members at the annual general meeting. I guess when you look at AVZ, it is currently suspended, is rapidly running out of money, and it is drowning in the sea of litigation. And when you look at the skills matrix of the board immediately prior to our open letter, the board comprised only technical people. So the 2 executive directors are both geologists. The chair is a metallurgist by professional background, and the independent director, I believe, has a diploma in civil engineering. So if you look at the key issues facing AVZ Minerals and contrast that to the skill set that the board has, there is a material mismatch. And I guess the 3 nominees of Fatel, including myself, have a range of very different skills that we believe would be very useful in bringing the company out of suspension and resolving these disputes in an amicable and fair way for all shareholders of AVZ, such that the project can move forward into development.
Right. Okay. So just for people perhaps maybe looking in from this, so AVZ Minerals were into lithium pegmatites before they were fashionable, built up to $4.6 billion company, and about 20 months ago were delisted from the ASX for non-disclosure of relevant information. That's the position it finds itself in today. So what's happened since that moment through to now, in the sense of its active attempts to relist?
The board has not been able to convince the ASX to relist it, nor does it seem, frankly, particularly interested in relisting the company. And we believe that is a travesty for shareholders. One of the bargains that you expect when you invest in a listed company is liquidity and your ability to sell your shares. And what the suspension has done is taken away that ability of ordinary shareholders to sell their shares. Now, as you mentioned, this company traded to a market capitalization of 4.6 billion Australian dollars. So it's quite a considerable controversy that this company remains in suspension. And we would respectfully argue that the mining decree, which revoked the mining license for the project, provides clear evidence, objective evidence, as to why the DRC government took that view. And that is that the government articulated in that mining decree that the government could not participate in the development of the project. It was blocked because of the lack of harmonious relationships between the shareholders. And that is a direct reference to the dispute that currently is unresolved between Dathomir and the state government agency Cominière.
Right. I'm sure we're going to get into the weeds of this, but I think before, what I'm trying to get through at the beginning is just trying to work out who's here at the zoo here. So tell us about Fattail. So they are a shareholder, not a significant shareholder. I mean, how much do they own? Yeah. And I guess more importantly, how many shareholders does it represent?
Yeah, that's correct. It's not a material shareholding. In fact, it has a less than significant shareholding in direct ownership in AVZ Minerals. However, it is an entity associated with Peter Huldich, who was an independent director of AVZ Minerals, and it was Peter's experience on that board as an independent director of AVZ Minerals, when he stepped down, that believed that the board could do with an injection of new skills and a rejuvenation of the board. Peter himself has a background, a law background, again, extensive experience in developing countries. I've explained my mine development, mine operation, and international arbitration experience. And Ty Ludbrook, the third nominee of Fattail, has an extensive background in finance and international arbitration. So we respectively submit to the AVZ shareholders. This is the basket of skill set necessary to deal with these current challenges. And we say, look, the litigation strategy that has been embarked on for the last 24 months, 18 months, is not yielding the desired result. The company is not dealing with the central issue which the DRC government has raised, which is the harmonious relationships. And you only get harmonious relationships if you amicably resolve the dispute at the shareholder level, at the Dathomir level. And as I said, we don't believe that is a huge task or a complex task, but we do respectfully submit that the current board, because of the hostile nature and the personal nature of the litigation between those partners, that they perhaps are not in the best position to resolve that dispute. And in order for the project to move forward, that dispute has got to be resolved according to the ministerial decree issued by the government when they revoke the mining license. And the other point is that not only was the mining license revoked, but the underlying exploration license has moved from Dathomir, which was the 75% owned subsidiary of AVZ, back to Cominière, the government agency. Now, AVZ believes that's not lawful and so on and so forth, but the bottom line is, the mining license was revoked and the exploration license is now registered in the sworn enemy of AVZ and Dathomir. So we say, look, the company's running out of money. It cannot fund the extent of international arbitration that it's involved in, or the extensive domestic court cases that are happening. And it's perhaps time to consider at least an alternative strategy to resolve this so the project can move ahead.
Did you approach the company before this open letter and make these recommendations or offer your services to them? You have, and and that was rejected out of hand, was it?
Yes, Matthew, that's absolutely right. As I said, we had hoped that this would be done in a cooperative spirit, and we approached the chair for a discussion, explaining this was the intention, and hoped to have a discussion before moving forward. And we
what were the reasons for the right? It got no response. Okay, no response. So it wasn't a case of we've got this in hand. It wasn't a case of you want too much money. It wasn't a case of we're nearly there, don't need your help. You don't know what the reason was. Okay,
it wasn't actually even an acknowledgement of the correspondence.
Okay, well let's take the response from the company itself to some of the points that you've made, and they put a press release out, and they disagree with your point with regard to the discussions in country between the company and the ministry or the government, broader terms. They feel they are advancing those discussions. They are trying to get an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, to provide a pathway to try and understand, can they resolve this issue? So perhaps they feel they've got this in hand. Why? And again, given you've had no communication, I don't know what information is public, and I don't know what insider information you have. Why would we have any reason to believe that what the company says is not true?
Well, I think the last time the shareholders were promised a resolution was 4 May 2022. That, you may recall, was the critical announcement that was issued a matter of days before the train halt and suspension. In that announcement, the company wrote, I think from recollection, 2.5 pages detailing why the mining license was imminent and outlining that the project was going to be split into the northern section and the southern section. And the clear inference was that AVZ, through Dathomir, would be the beneficiary of the northern and the southern section. That is not our understanding. Our understanding was that the DRC government had the intention of splitting the mining license into the southern portion, which includes all the known resources of the project, plus outstanding exploration potential. That was reserved effectively for Dathomir, and then the northern section, the further exploration to the north, would be tendered or issued to other parties. That point was not made clearly to the shareholders, and then within a couple of days, the company was halted, the trading was halted and suspended. And in the 24 days leading up to that, as I said, the market capitalization of the company dropped by approximately $2 billion. So we, as shareholders, were being told that on 4 May, everything was on track for the issue of the mining license. And within a couple of days, the company was in suspension. Now, the only material thing that happened, leading up to that, was the Africa Intelligence Report of 26 April, which reported the High Court's decision in respect of the matters before that court in relation to the 75% interest in Dathomir. And Africa Intelligence reported that judgment. It was not spurious, it was not immaterial, and it was absolutely factual. And in that 4 May announcement, again, AVZ derided that all the recent press, including obviously the Africa Intelligence Report, to say that it was mere speculation and immaterial. So shareholders obviously took a different view, and the share price materially reduced. So if I can put the position, these very positive announcements of progress, would have to be taken with a grain of salt. The second point I'd make in relation to that, Matthew, is that it was only in our open letter when we said, litigating against the host government or fighting City Hall perhaps may not be the smartest thing, that immediately thereafter, Matthew, and this is an important point, immediately after the release of the open letter, that international arbitration litigation was walked back materially by the AVZ board. The next thing we heard was that there was a meeting with the president of the DRC. The timing of that we find interesting, in that meeting occurred immediately after, again, the open letter. And the third point I'd make, finally, in respect of that announcement, is that doesn't really cure the essence of the ministerial decree, which is the need for harmonious relationships between Dathomir and Cominière. So, those disputes still have to be resolved. And because of the personal animosity now that exists because of this very aggressive litigation strategy, we respectfully submit that the current board are not in the best position to resolve those disputes.
Okay, no, I could say I want to come back to the presidential meeting in a second, but there is just I'm trying to look at it from all sides here, because I've no vested interest. I'm not a shareholder. I'm not shorting. I'm not, I've got nothing to do with this other than just great intrigue about the sorts of problems that mining companies face when going about their business. This was a public company, or is, but suspended. Public company. It is restricted by the exchange in terms of what it can and can't say at various points. So, are you saying that perhaps they did have the ability to be more forthcoming with information than they were? Was this misrepresentation of the facts or misinterpretation of the facts? How do you see it?
Well, that's a very fine question, Matthew. The Australian Financial Review, which is Australia's leading and most respected financial masthead, posed the question as to whether the seriousness of the shareholders' dispute was disclosed early enough and the seriousness of it disclosed. That is a serious question because, as I said, in the period of under a month when the share price dropped by $2 billion, really the only major change was the deteriorating relationship, and really there was minimal disclosure in respect of the deteriorating relationship, and any in-country decision adverse to the interests of AVZ and its subsidiaries was not disclosed. Furthermore, if I just point out again, the revocation that I've referred to of the mining licenses, the 2 ministerial decrees, that was not disclosed by the company. Again, the Australian Financial Review got hold of those 2 ministerial decrees, contacted the company for comment. They got no comment. They published the fact that the ministerial decrees had been issued, and only after that did the AVZ make an announcement. Similarly, in respect of the exploration license, PR 13359, similarly, it was only after we had pointed out that the registered owner of the exploration license, the underlying tenure, was no longer Dathomir, but it moved back to the government's agency. And only after our open letter was that issue disclosed. So, and then finally, in terms of the in-country litigation, as I said, the original Lubumbashi High Court decision, which ordered the 75% share certificate to be destroyed, and the adverse findings, criminal findings against one of the technical directors, was not only was it not disclosed, the Africa Intelligence report published on the 26th of April was demeaned. And then finally, we raised that in our open letter that shareholders weren't made aware of those findings. And AVZ really made 2 points. First of all, it said AVZ was not involved in that litigation. Well, with respect, that really misses the point, because the 75% subsidiary was a principal defendant in that litigation. So to argue that AVZ wasn't, is patently absurd. Dathomir is a 75% owned subsidiary consolidated in the group accounts. Secondly, and equally important, AVZ said in their response that they've appealed the decision. Well, again, yes, they appealed it, but they lost the appeal, and they haven't disclosed the loss of the appeal. So the Court of Appeals found broadly in line with the lower court. What they did was reduce the damages claim against Dathomir, the subsidiary of AVZ, to $25 million US. Now, if you go to the annual financial statements of AVZ, which have just been released for the year ended 30th of June 2023, guess what? the contingent liability of $25 million US in accordance with the appeals court judgment against Dathomir is not reported as a contingent liability. And Matthew, that's incredibly material, because the company, as I said, we'll see shortly when the September quarterly cash position is announced, but it most probably has in the order net cash of only 10 million US, and here you have an award for damages of 25 million US by an appeals court, and the company takes a view, well, it's spurious and immaterial. We respectfully say that's not the standard of continuous disclosure expected in the Australian market. Yes, I agree. There are exceptions to the continuous disclosure rules, but where you have ministerial decree revoking mining licenses, where you have appeals lost and judgments of that significance, particularly in the context of a contested director's nomination process, we say that information is material. And I guess if you want authority, we would point to the ASX letter, which imposed a mandatory suspension on the company because of its refusal to comply with continuous disclosure requirements. And we say, the facts are clear. That the reason why the ministerial decree revoked the licenses was clear in it. So, yeah.
Okay. Let's say that. I want to come back to the point about the meeting with the president of the DRC.
Yes.
And I've sat in the corridors of power waiting, twiddling my thumbs all across Africa. These meetings take time to set up. They take time to actually happen in terms of the time suggested is not necessarily the time you actually get there. So it takes a long time to set these things up. You said you were surprised at how quickly that meeting happened after the open letter came out. Is that the time? So you mentioned earlier?
Correct. Yes.
Right. So why were you surprised?
You may recall there was another controversial report in respect of a $1 million US cash payment made to an advisory person in the DLC, together with a further price of another 5 million US, total 6 million. Again, that was not disclosed, and again, the AFR reported on it. And immediately after the AFR report, AVZ again made limited disclosure in respect of that 6 million US payment. To the best of my knowledge, AVZ has not made any disclosure in respect of, whether that upfront 1 million US led to any positive, meaningful developments. I suspect not, because we haven't seen anything. And secondly, as you know, the DLC is going into election mode, so a number of names have been nominated as contesting a presidential election. And based on my extensive experience in developing countries, that there is always movement in the paddock leading up to presidential elections. But I think the significant point is, that we pointed out that, litigation against your host country is a courageous move. That was immediately walked back after our open letter, and then this one meeting with the president was disclosed. Now, we no AVZ shareholder has been advised as to exactly what was discussed, and any developments. So, it's great that the CEO apparently had a meeting, but that's all we know at this point in time.
Right. Okay. And you talk about, you've introduced a few names here, and there's a few more names to be added. Dathomir, this 15% interest, who now owns it, in your opinion?
Well, it's a matter of contested ownership, isn't it? So, in summary, AVZ and the subsidiaries entered into a contract to acquire a 15% interest in Dathomir from Dathomir. As I said, we're not aware of the disclosure of any of the conditions subsequent or precedent to those option agreements or share purchase agreements. All we do know is that there was a fairly nominal deposit paid, as I recall, and then the purchase consideration effectively spread over 3 years, equal annual installments over 3 years, starting from the satisfaction of conditions precedent. So we don't know when those conditions precedent were satisfied. What we do know is that Dathomir terminated that share purchase agreement. AVZ says it's a purported termination. But interestingly enough, notwithstanding AVZ's argument that the termination was invalid, 3 months later, they made an announcement to say that they had satisfied all the conditions of that agreement and had paid the $20 million up front, which, it's interesting if the termination was all invalid and of no force and effect. Be that as it may, that is a matter currently before the arbitration courts and subject to certain litigation in country. But the relationship between Dathcom and Dathomir, as a consequence of that, has materially, there's been a material personal falling out. And that, as I say, is the critical element required under the ministerial decree to have harmonious relationships with your joint venture partners. So, effectively, what the government is asking is, look, this dispute between the shareholders, this TIF gets resolved, and the mining license hopefully will be reinstated, and the company can get on with the project. And I think every shareholder that I've spoken to today, sorry, Matthew, for interrupting, every shareholder that I've spoken to today wants the project to proceed in short order and wants the suspension lifted, So there seems to be a minority of shareholders, who are seeking retribution for, let's call it, for want of a better word, the apparent renege by Dathomir. But if I can make this point, the contract envisaged a consideration of, let's say, approximately $20 million for 15%. But if you take the closing price of AVZ immediately prior to the trading halt and permanent suspension, I think that 15% attributes to a value of about $500 million Australian dollars. So there was plenty of scope for AVZ to perhaps touch up the consideration in the form of shares or some other form of consideration to Dathomir. The point is that there's been a personal falling out, and it's not going to be resolved by the current board, in our humble opinion.
Right. Okay. We've both worked in Africa extensively, and we both know each country has its own peculiarities, and it can be very difficult for lots of reasons. In this instance, has, in your opinion, the DRC government's actions and intent been above board, or are there other things that perhaps the company has been battling with to try and get this resolved?
I have some sympathy with the DRC government's position as expressed in the ministerial decree, because really what they were saying is, look, because of this shareholders dispute, we've been blocked from benefiting from the development of the project. Effectively, please resolve the dispute so we can benefit from the project. And the other point I'd make is that the proposal by the DRC government to confer the mining license on the southern portion incredibly important to the shareholders of AVZ, because that is the project. That's where the 400 million tons of the known JORC resource sits. It's got outstanding exploration potential beyond that. And the current definitive feasibility study only calls for a production throughput rate of 4 million tons per annum. So that, it's a huge world-class project in its own right. And, I fail to understand why that shareholders dispute wasn't resolved amicably in the national interest. So yes, broadly speaking, nothing we've seen here is any different to any developing country that I've operated in. Often people take the view in these jurisdictions, that an agreement is really the start of the negotiation process than the end point. And as I said, in my experience, arrogantly litigating is really counterproductive. If you're looking for retribution through domestic courts or international arbitration, there's no reasonable prospect, because, as I've said to you, international tribunals aren't in the habit of ordering sovereign governments to reinstate title, and they certainly don't, haven't shown a tendency to overturn, criminal decisions, other than in the absence of being able to prove corruption, which of course, is a very, very difficult task. So, for all those reasons, that is why the three FATTEL independent directors have been nominated to bring, to articulate an alternative, perhaps more commercial, more pragmatic view, where we are not invested in he said, she said, the fairness of it, but to focus on the end objective, which is to get this project into production, which is what I've done, for the last 30 odd years, and get the benefits flowing to the local communities and to the government, and ultimately to the shareholders of AVZ. As I said, this project, had a market capitalization of $4.6 billion Australian. And in my view, there's 4.6 billion reasons why this dispute should be resolved quickly, fairly, and in the best interests of all shareholders.
So what would you say to the current board? I get what you're saying to shareholders, and perhaps some people will get behind that, with the intent. And okay, you outlined experience in negotiation in Africa broadly. But what would you say to the board? Because they've been at this. Sometimes it's a case of you've got your head down and you don't feel you've got time to look up. They feel that they've engaged in a path and direction which they feel is right. You feel you've got another solution which you believe is right, but you're at loggerheads. What's going to get this over the line for you, and what would you ask them to listen to?
Well, I guess, Matthew, as I said at the outset, we had hoped that this would be an amicable resolution at the board level, and I've made the point that the skill set of the three directors is vastly different to the current executive director skill set. There are now, post our open letter, two directors were announced. One is an employee, and the other, I understand, has had some previous consulting arrangements, directly or indirectly, with the company and associated interests of the executive. Be that as it may, the resolution of title, joint venture disputes, international arbitration, that experience is still lacking in the board, and therefore we would say to the board, carefully consider what has been brought to the table, and the fact that we, have no vested interest in the dispute, have not been, in an acrimonious relationship with the joint ventures, and I frankly think that, I would expect that, and I have not spoken to Dathomir or Cominière, but I would suspect they would welcome, the intervention of an independent party to sit down and, hear their side of the story. As you know, in disputes of this nature, there's always two sides of the story, and resolve a, fair and equitable deal. As I say, given the value of that 50% interest versus the original consideration, surely there's got to be an opportunity to, uplift the value in a modest and sensible manner to resolve the dispute and allow the project to move forward. The prize is so big that a personal dispute shouldn't get in the way of a $4.6 billion project.
Mike, thanks for your time today. Thank you.
My pleasure.